Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Inc., New York's window company, Capital One Bank, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding for this program is made possible by grants from AVR Realty Company, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Beechwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, F.J. Siami Construction, Friedman LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors LLC, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, M&T Bank, Markham LLP, Marcus and Millichap Real Estate Investment Services, Meridian Capital Group, The Moynihan Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans LLP, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling Inc., Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, The Wickoff Group.
Hello, my name is Michael Stoller. I mean, certain people really make a change of New York City. Certain people who've been born in the area, wasn't born in New York City, but have really changed the perspective of New York. And I'm very fortunate today to have Ken Knuckles, who is the president of the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. Ken, you and I are pretty close in age. You're 62 years of age, right?
I am, Michael.
And
I don't think anybody knew that until now.
Hey,
thank you very much.
That's unfortunately this is what we do this. But now you were born where? Mount Vernon, right?
Mount Vernon, New York.
And your dad, you said to me, originally started as a chauffeur.
He was a chauffeur for many, many years for a family in Rye, but at the end of his years, he was a doorman over in Bronxville,
right,
a member of 32
B&J.
Yeah.
Right. And Mom was?
Mom was a housewife, fortunately, for much of my early years, but she also did domestic work in Bronxville.
Now, what's interesting, you're one of 4 children, right?
I'm the oldest of 4.
You're the oldest of 4 children. And, when you were a kid, you were working on odd jobs, right?
Odd jobs, I worked in stores. I was a pretty good athlete. I had aspirations like many young men, especially those of us who were tall, at least in those days when you were 6 feet, 6'2", you were pretty tall. So I think I had aspirations of being an athlete, but you discover girls and music and other things.
So now what happens is, this is the heart of Vietnam time, I mean, and you decide to get drafted because you pushed for your draft, and you, at 17, get drafted, and you go to Dominican Republic, right?
I go to the Dominican Republic after basic training, which was in Dix. I then went to Fort Lee and then Fort Bragg, and then to the Dominican Republic in October of 1965. Many people don't remember, because it's been eclipsed by the Vietnam War, that then President Johnson sent first the Marines and then the 82nd Airborne into the Dominican Republic in May of 1965. And the troops were there for about 18 months. My troop went down in October of 1965, and we were the last unit to leave to redeploy to the United States in September of 1966.
You finish that and you come back to New York, moving back to Mount Vernon also, right? And you get a job with ConEdison.
Consolidated Edison. Family members looked out for me, as I will tell you subsequently, but I had a cousin. His name was Robert Farrow, and he worked at ConEdison. And when I was home a few days, I got a call from him, and he says, you know, you got to get a job, so you should come down and see me on Irving Place. So I went down to see him, applied, and wound up getting a job in the old law department in the building on 14th Street. And I worked there for about a year, and ConEd was good company then, good company now. But I think the sum total of the experience was that I decided I needed to get an education, a formal education.
Now, while you were there, you had the opportunity, you had a cousin living in Harlem also.
Yeah.
You had the opportunity to get involved with the Arch program, right?
Yeah, Architects Renewal Committee of Harlem was a program that had come together principally to be an advocate for the redevelopment of Harlem, and they got involved in other issues like the Columbia expansion into the Morningside Park, which became very controversial and ultimately was abandoned. But a secondary mission was to get more minorities, i.e. blacks and Puerto Ricans at the time, into the study of architecture and urban planning. And this cousin that you make reference to was in the profession. He was a mechanical designer, and he had a friend who taught at Arch, Jim Doman, who's still a practicing architect here in the city. So he was very, very enthusiastic about me getting into this program, and I didn't know much about architecture, knew virtually nothing about it. So the initial foray was to really learn drafting, and the more that I learned about it, the more intrigued I became. So I started out initially while I was working at ConEd, but in June of 1968, I decided to leave ConEd and to immerse myself in the study of architecture. And I took some summer courses at Cooper Union, and Arch gave you classes. The good fortune of having been in the military and gotten out alive was that I had the GI Bill. So I decided, and Arch was supported by the AIA as well as the Ford Foundation, and they were there to provide scholarships for students with potential. So I took the SATs for a number of schools. Michigan happened to be one of them, and did well enough to actually be admitted.
So you went and became a Wolverine.
I started Michigan the following year, 1969, and became a Wolverine. Up until that point, all I knew about Michigan was its basketball team and Cassie Russell and a few other people. But I must tell you, coming from a town that had all of 70,000 people, when I went to a Michigan-Ohio State game in the fall of 1969,
they had more than the entire town.
There was 100,000 people in the stadium.
Now, you know, the interesting thing, because 1970, while you're at Michigan, you get married, but one of the benefits of ConEd is that you had a woman you worked with, was your mother-in-law today, right?
It was my mother-in-law. I worked very briefly in the Bronx on Cortlandt Avenue and 148th Street, and there was this glamorous woman who worked there. Her name was Gloria Fletcher, and she in turn had a daughter who was also glamorous, very glamorous. And for some reason that I probably will never know completely, she decided that I was appropriate, worthy of taking her daughter to see a movie. And we were introduced. Her daughter, Lorraine, came in to see her one day, and she was even prettier than the picture that I had been shown. So that was February of '68. We dated for more than 2 years, and of course it was during that time I transitioned from ConEd to go back to Michigan. And one day we had a conversation, and she said, you know, these long distance relationships can be pretty difficult, so maybe you need to make a decision. So I made a decision, and in August of 1970 we got married.
So now you're married,
Yep.
you're in Michigan,
Yeah.
and you're an architectural student. And you spend 4 years in architect, and then you continue at Michigan because you think that you want to continue as an architect, right?
Indeed, I did want to continue, and you know, Michigan has this great legacy of architecture. You know, Elio Saarinen and lots of other great architects have come through Ann Arbor Great architectural legacy. Louis Sullivan had designed a number of buildings on campus. So it's a great architectural legacy at Michigan. In about 1973, the year that I got a bachelor's, however, I tried to stay up in what was happening, read the architectural record a lot and everything, and it came across my attention span that a fellow by the name of John Portman, who was based in Atlanta, had taken the step beyond architecture and decided to develop something called Peachtree Center. And this had a seismic effect and a debate within the profession of architecture, because, as you know, architects heretofore had been seen as artisans purely, who were devoted to aesthetics.
It's criminal to be in
and
anything
to
else.
have a financial interest in a project was seen not to be ethical and otherwise. But for me, it raised the question of someone who decided to exercise more power over a project that he designed. So it was then that I became intrigued with the notion of development, because I thought that developers employ architects, and architects are certainly vital to giving ultimate expression to a built project. But the individual who really determined from the very inception to completion was the developer. So I became quite intrigued with that.
And now you decide that you want to become a lawyer, right?
Yeah, I decided to go to law school because I thought that would give me the greatest insight into the larger building process, finance, zoning law, building codes, everything like that. So I decided to go to law school. I applied to law school, got accepted at Howard University School of Law. And in those days, you had to have an emphasis, property law, criminal law, corporations. For obvious reasons, I decided to study property law, because that's where the land use regulatory environment was available for me.
So you come back. What year is it now?
77, I graduated from law school and came back to New York.
And your first job?
My first job was in the city. I had taken a test for the Corporation Council, and I had been called, but they wanted me to work in Brooklyn, and I didn't want to go to Brooklyn.
Didn't want to go to Brooklyn. Come on.
Now I know it's 2 train stops, but then Brooklyn seemed like a faraway place. So I took another job with a city agency, the old Department of Personnel, with a burning desire ultimately to become a zoning lawyer. And I interviewed with a few firms, but never really got an opportunity. So I worked as a lawyer for several years, first at the Department of Personnel, and then as counsel to the City Civil Service Commission. And then in about 1985, I got an opportunity to go over to HPD, the city's Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development. It was then led by late Tony Gleibman, a good friend and a great civil servant who worked in the Lindsay administration and the Koch administration.
And in 85, it was building. HPD had a big role.
Yeah.
Major role, good experience, putting your professional experience on the ground over there.
Right.
But you said to me in like 1982, you met this councilman from the Bronx by the name of Freddie Ferrer.
Young man, Fernando Ferrer. He had been elected to the city council in 1982. We were introduced by a mutual friend and maintained contact. And then you may recall in 1986 there was a lot of turmoil in city government. A turnover of at least 2 borough presidents, one of whom was from the Bronx. And Freddie Ferrer was then on the city council. And in those days, when a borough president left office prematurely, the council delegation named the interim borough president until the next election. They named Fernando Ferrer, and he asked me to be his deputy borough president. So in May of 1987, I left HPD after about 2 years, and I went with Freddie.
That was an interesting time, especially, because the Bronx, in the 60s and the 70s, the Bronx was in trouble. But in that time period, there was a lot of development. There was still vacant land, and you were able to focus and change the environment of the Bronx with a lot of housing. I mean, that was Koch's hope at that time, the $1 billion housing.
Absolutely, absolutely. The mayor, Ed Koch, put $1 billion, which people sneeze at now, but in 1986, $1 billion was an extraordinary amount of money to allocate to vacant housing. The Bronx at that point had probably 50,000 units of vacant housing. And I mean lots of buildings on either side of the Grand Concourse, some even within the concourse, of large assemblages, you know, buildings with 60, 70, 80, 90, in some cases a couple of hundred units. So there was really raw material there. So we embraced it. We worked very closely with the Koch administration and really set into motion what has, I think, really been an urban renaissance. Now 24, 25 years later, now you've got more than 100,000 units of new housing in the Bronx, and it's really an urban
I'd say
success
probably
story.
the largest number of new housing built in the city has been in the Bronx.
Has been in the Bronx. We had the furthest to come, and we've come the furthest.
Then after that, you get into the Koch administration.
I had actually worked in the Koch administration.
Right.
I started working for the city a week before Ed Koch was elected. After my tenure as deputy borough president, I joined the Dinkins administration.
That's what I meant then.
In 1990, I joined the Dinkins administration as commissioner of the Department of General Services.
And you were responsible for everything with the exception of school building.
With the exception of school buildings, we did building construction, we did facilities management, we did the leasing for the city, we did fleet management. It was a city support agency. And for me, that's when my disciplines of law and architecture really came home.
And management.
And management. Because at that time, DGS contained what was a 400-person architectural and engineering department. It's now DDC, but in those days it was still a part of DGS. So it was a great experience for me. And you're right, management, it was a 3,200-person agency. It had an operating and capital budget of about $1 billion combined. So that's when I really realized that I could be a manager.
So you leave the Dinkins administration and you go to the South Bronx.
Yeah, worked at Sobro for about a year as a senior vice president, and then
you get into education.
Yeah, you know, I had the good fortune. Emily Lloyd, who was a sanitation commissioner in the Dinkins administration, I think first and only woman who has ever served as a sanitation commissioner. I believe that's the case. She had gone to Columbia after she left government, and she was essentially the COO. So she invited me to come over and be a part of her team. And I went to Columbia in late '95 as vice president of support services. And Columbia is a fascinating place to work. It is now, as you know, a real part of the expansion in upper Manhattan. It's really going to be a catalyst for economic development up there because of the construction and the jobs that it will be
Which
adding.
really has a great lead-in, because when you're at Columbia, you join a couple of boards, but one board that you join is you join the board of the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Center,
yes.
where you are today, which we'll talk about in a second. And you also then get really into something which you deserve to get involved with for your architectural, your law, and everything else in your experience. You get on the City Planning Commission.
Fernando Ferrer, in the last year of his term, asked me to be the Bronx representative for city planning. And city planning had been an agency of great interest from the very beginning of my government career. And I was appointed, and for 10 years now, I have been on the Planning Commission. In 2002, I was asked by Amanda Burton to become the vice chair. And it's unique because historically, you know, the Planning Commission consists of 13 members, 7 of which are the mayor's appointees. Each borough president has an appointment, that's 5, and then the 13th is the public advocate. Historically, the vice chair had always been amongst the mayoral appointees.
Right.
I am a borough president appointee and as well as vice chair, and it's been a good balance. the City Planning Commission under Amanda's leadership has accomplished extraordinary things. Over 100 rezonings, and I think in contrast to prior years and prior administrations where City Planning Commission had been essentially a venue for real estate transactions, under the Bloomberg administration and under Amanda's leadership, it's really become an economic development entity, and it's repositioned the city.
There is no question.
It's repositioned the city.
The major redevelopments, you look at Williamsburg, you look at Coney Island, which will be taken care of, Willets Point, and I mean
125th Street.
125th Street, all of these.
All over. I mean, we've done a couple of things. On the one hand, we have repositioned areas that are close to transportation and can accommodate more density. We've done that, but at the same time, in neighborhoods that are more removed from transportation, which have issues of scale, and in many cases have been experiencing architecture that was out of scale, building that was out of scale and out of context for neighborhoods. We have rezoned those neighborhoods so that the neighborhood character and appeal of those communities would continue.
You're on the board of UMES, and you toss your hat in to become president of Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. For my audience, explain what the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone is.
The Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone is a local development corporation that was really conceived to implement the Empowerment Zone designation. The Empowerment Zone designation arose out of legislation written by Charles Rangel, aided by the Clinton administration, and its premise was to take public money and invest it in ways that would leverage private capital. The Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone was one of 7 original designations: Upper Manhattan, Baltimore, LA, Chicago. It received $100 million from the federal government. The congressman was able to leverage an additional $200 million. $100 million from then Mayor Dinkins and $100 million from then Mayor Cuomo. So $300 million, $50 million was apportioned to the Bronx. Upper Manhattan was left with $250 million. To date, we have invested in a combination of tax-exempt bonds, loans, and grants, about $225 million. But more importantly, we have leveraged almost $1 billion of private capital. So if you look at East River Plaza, that's a $400 million project. If you look at Harlem, USA, if you look at some of the Gotham Plaza in the 125th Street corridor, those are examples of our capital leveraging private capital. We've created over 9,000 jobs, and we have really helped redefine Upper Manhattan as an area now that is really growing, I mean, despite the economy.
Now, with regard to that, and I think it's really important because you were on the board, you weren't the president at that time, but Harlem, USA and East River Plaza and 125th Street have been the major changes. I mean, you knew Harlem when you were a kid because you said you went to Arch program over there, and Harlem, USA really changed. That was the Pathmark, which was done by the Abyssinian Development Corp. These were major implementation to change Harlem.
Major projects, because what it said to the large investment community is that this is a place that you can invest. And what it also said is that there's a market here that has been underserved and untapped. And there's still, despite all of the development that's happened up there, there's still an underserved market. We need more quality retail. Housing you can always use, but we need much more in the way of quality retail, and we're getting it in East River Plaza.
I mean, East River Plaza right now, you have the Costco, Target's going to open up. You have the Marshalls, you have the Best Buy, you have the Petco, and you have the Bob's Furniture. And I mean, these were all needs of the city of New York and definitely of Harlem.
And I should tell you, the money that we invested, which was on the part of the Empowerment Zone, about $55 million, will help create 1,500 jobs. And the vast majority of those jobs will be occupied by residents of Upper Manhattan. You don't get our money unless you agree to hire local residents. So in this case, it's a loan, and that project will yield benefits for generations to come.
And Harlem, USA has been a success.
A great success. Old Navy, the Gap, the Magic Johnson Theater. There is space in for community events. Really a catalyst for 125th Street.
And then, you know, it's not on 125th Street, the Potomkin and the Auto.
The Auto Mall there on East 122nd Street, which is just north of the Uptown New York parcel, which we, you know, one day hope will happen sooner rather than later. But, you know, we've not only done large projects, we do small business lending. Many restaurants in Harlem have opened with our assistance.
And the supermarket that recently opened?
Best Yet,
Best Yet.
In the Frederick Douglass corridor. It's in the ground level of the Soha project. 22,000 square foot fresh food market. It's kind of on the order of Whole Foods.
That's what I hear.
Triplex, a level below, ground level, and then there's a third kind of mezzanine level.
And a definite need for the
Definite
community.
need for it in the corridor because, you know, you have the path mark on East 125th, you have another one on 145th Street.
But you don't have anything.
There's
There's
a vast
over
market
there. There's no question. And you know, also the money that you gave the College of Osteopathic Medicine. You know, that building was a blighted building.
Bloomstein's building, an old building, which you know, in the early 20th century was kind of like the Macy's of 125th Street, had its own history, but had been closed for 30 years. That building. Now it's an osteopathic medicine. A school of medicine run by Touro College also provides jobs to people. So we have been a catalyst for economic development across the cultural arena, retail and commercial, small business lending. In fact, we recently instituted a micro lending program with the Grameen Bank, which of course was conceived by Muhammad Yunus, who won a Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago for micro lending in Asia, India and Asia. So we've got a broad-based approach to economic development, and I've been privileged to been able to lead UMES, and I think we've made a difference.
I definitely think you did. But you also made a difference. You know, you and that nice, good-looking woman that your mother-in-law introduced, you have two wonderful daughters, right?
I do, Mike. My oldest daughter is a lawyer in city government, Tracy. She will soon go forth and multiply in October.
Wonderful.
She and my son-in-law, Chris. And I have a younger daughter, Lauren, who is a makeup artist.
She's at FIT, right?
She's an FIT graduate. She now works for MAC Cosmetics. Yeah.
Does she work up in Harlem?
No, she works in Soho, down in the department store there.
For a kid from Mount Vernon who had, you know, went into the Army, you know, you've really done a lot over your life, and I'm really happy that, and you truly are a builder of New York, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Mike.
Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Inc., New York's window company, Capital One Bank, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding for this program is made possible by grants from AVR Realty Company, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Beechwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, F.J. Siami Construction, Friedman LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors LLC, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, M&T Bank, Markham LLP, Marcus and Millichap Real Estate Investment Services, Meridian Capital Group, the Moynihan Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans LLP, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling Inc., Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, the Wickoff Group.
you.